Fresh, tangy, fermented sauerkraut is a great example of taking a couple of really humble ingredients, applying some simple techniques, and turning them into something fantastic. Whether you're looking to use fermentation to unlock nutrients and benefit from probiotics, or you're just looking for a tasty condiment or side dish, stay tuned to learn how to master the deceptively simple art of fermenting sauerkraut at home. Let's get adventurous. To start off with, we're gonna need some cabbage. I've got half a head. Green and red cabbage both work for this, but I prefer green. You can add other vegetables too. I like to add a little bit of carrot. The only other ingredients are sea salt and, optionally, some black pepper and caraway seeds. In terms of equipment, you're going to need a set of kitchen scales for weighing large things, and a smaller, more accurate set of scales for weighing small things. For weighing really small quantities of things, like the amount of salt that we're going to use in this recipe, it's really important to have an accurate set of scales. And while normal kitchen scales are great for weighing larger things, for smaller quantities they're not that accurate. I'll put a link in the description to a video from Helen Renee that does a really good job of explaining why this is the case. You're also going to need a large, clean jar, preferably with a wide mouth. This doesn't need to be sterilized, just clean. Starting with the cabbage, we're going to take off the outer leaf. This can be a little bit limp, but it's not going to go to waste. It's going to come in really handy as a kind of barrier that's going to hold all of the cabbage underneath the fermentation liquid. I'm just checking to make sure this leaf is a little bit wider than the jar. That way I'll be sure of a nice snug fit. The core of the cabbage is going to be too tough to eat even after fermentation, so we're going to start by cutting that out. Now the bulk of the work in this recipe is in chopping. So pick your favourite vegetable chopping knife and get stuck in. You can decide whether to cut your cabbage acrossways or root to tip. Cutting acrossways, you'll start off with finer bits of cabbage and they'll get thicker as you go, so your final mix of cabbage will have pieces that are quite chunky as well as pieces that are quite fine. I like to cut the cabbage from the top to the bottom, that way each piece is thick at one end and thin at the other end. I find this results in a more even texture, but it doesn't make much of a difference. You can do it however you like. Slice this fairly thinly. I find if I shave it too thin, it can break apart later on in the process, but I do like my sauerkraut fairly fine. If you like it chunkier, that's fine too. Go with thicker strips. Once that's chopped, it's going into a large clean bowl. If you spot any larger chunks that haven't broken apart, don't worry too much about those yet. We'll take care of those later in the process. For the carrot, I don't usually bother peeling them unless the skin seems to be unusually tough, but I am going to remove the top and the bottom. I want reasonably long sticks of carrot to go with my fairly long strands of cabbage, so I'm going to cut this carrot roughly in half. Carrots roll around quite a lot, which makes them hard to cut finely, so I'm starting off by shaving off one edge. This should give it a nice solid base. I'm then slicing the carrot into fairly thin slabs. You don't need fantastic knife skills for this, just take your time. Follow the same technique with the second half until both carrots are in nice thin strips. Then pair up similarly sized strips into stacks of 3 or 4. Then for each of these stacks, cut them long ways as fine as you can. Then add those to the bowl with the cabbage. I'm adding some freshly ground pepper. Some people like to throw in whole peppercorns. Personally, I don't really like it if I crunch on a whole peppercorn later on down the track, so I grind mine in. I'm using a fairly generous amount because I quite like things to be peppery. If that's not your thing, use a bit less. Caraway seeds are traditional, but totally optional. I don't like them that much. I think they add a nice flavour, but I don't want it to be too strong, so I'm only adding a small amount. Probably less than 1/4 teaspoon. Now, in theory, the liquid that comes out of our vegetables should be enough in quantity to submerge all the vegetables in to ferment. I find sometimes it's a little bit light on, so I like to add a couple of tablespoons of water to this mix just to make sure there's a little bit extra. And adding it now means that we can factor in the weight of the water when we calculate how much salt we need. And in order to calculate how much salt we need, first we need to weigh all of the ingredients to be fermented. And at this point, I'm about to realize that I haven't weighed the bowl. We don't want to include the weight of the bowl in the calculation, that'll throw things way out. So let's tip this out and start again. So I'm going to weigh my bowl, and because it's quite likely that at some point in time I'm going to make this mistake again, I'm going to write the weight of the bowl on the bottom with a Sharpie. That way I'll know for next time. So the total weight of my ingredients and the bowl is 851 grams. To our vegetables we need to add 2% salt by weight. So if I take the total weight of the ingredients and the bowl, and subtract the weight of the bowl and times that by 0.02, this tells me that I need 13.5 grams of salt. And of course we're weighing this with our small, accurate set of scales. Say hello, Mr. Scales. Hello. Now it's important to use pure sea salt for this. You don't want to use table salt. The anti-caking agents might interfere with the fermentation process. The same goes for iodized salt. Because my sea salt is quite coarse, I'm just giving it a rough grind in a mortar and pestle. If your sea salt is a bit finer than mine, then don't worry about this step. Sprinkle the salt over all the ingredients in the bowl and then start to massage it in with your hands. This should be a fairly firm massage. You really want to squeeze the cabbage, bruise it a little bit, and use the salt as an abrasive to scratch it up a bit. This will help the vegetables to soften and release a lot of water. This is where you can also use this opportunity to break up any larger chunks that haven't separated. As you massage the vegetables, you'll notice them get significantly softer and wetter as you go. But eventually this will get to a point where it seems like you're not making much more progress. At this point, take a break and let it sit for 30 to 45 minutes and then come back and massage it some more. Hopefully, once that's had a bit of a chance to rest, the salt will have drawn out even more water and your cabbage should be nice and soft and quite wet. Give it another firm massage, trying to squeeze out as much of that water as you can. Now carefully transfer all of this mix into your jar. I know this looks like a lot of vegetables to fit into this jar, but we will be compressing them down quite a bit. So trust me, they'll fit. Just keep pushing them down as you go. This will compact them and they'll release even more water. Once it's all in, I'm getting my cabbage leaf lid, which I've cut to the same diameter as the jar, and settling that down on top. This will help hold everything down under the liquid. I'm then filling another slightly smaller jar with water and using that as a weight to press down on the top and hold everything under the liquid. This tends to expand as it ferments due to the gas that's created, so I'm just putting it in a shallow dish to catch any overflow. Then we'll put this in a room at room temperature for anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks. The length of time that it's fermented for and the temperature of the room can make a difference to the quantity and types of beneficial bacteria that's produced by the fermentation. If getting the right mix of probiotic bacteria is important to you, I'll put a link in the description to a website that does a really good job of explaining how to get the right temperature and time to get the optimal mix of probiotics. After a few days, you should notice that it's creating gas and there should be lots of little bubbles forming. This is carbon dioxide and it's a normal part of the fermentation process. You'll probably want to check on this daily just to make sure everything's going as planned. If the liquid level starts to drop through evaporation, you can just add a little bit more water. If you notice any froth or anything building up around the top like mine has here, just take out the jar that you're using as a weight and give it a clean. Once it's fermented, check for signs of spoilage. It should have a pleasant, clean, slightly tart aroma. It can then be stored in the fridge. Stored in a sealed container in the fridge, this should last for months. So you'll always have ready access to use this as a condiment, a side dish, or a cooking ingredient. If you'd like to learn how to make this delicious sauerkraut quesadilla, click the left-hand link at the end of the video. That's all for now. Happy snacking. I forgot to weigh the bowl.